Hello, fellow loom knitters. Today, I'd like to focus in on how to add a bead. We're going to be adding beads or buttons to any project at any time. So, and just to be clear before I go any further, when I say adding a button, I'm talking in a decorative way only, not a functional way. That is another separate video entirely that I haven't quite made yet. It's on the list. Okay, so we're going to look at the tools that we need to add a bead, how to add the bead or button, and where to add the bead, and also where not to add the bead and why not to add the bead in that location. So stay with me. So first up are the tools that we need to add the bead or the button. Most of the tools are the obvious ones. You're going to need the loom, a loom pick, your yarn, and of course, any beads or buttons that you're adding to your project. The key component to make all of this process happen is dental floss. Let me just hold that up so you can see that. And you can find the dental floss pretty much at any drugstore. Now, I have seen other knitters and loom knitters load beads onto their yarn, and now you're dealing with a piece of yarn that is, your working yarn is very heavy, and you're loading the beads and you're pulling them up as you go. Well, that's all great if you've loaded the correct number of beads in the correct order that you need to have them in to apply to your project. I'm not that good. Just telling you right now, I'm not that good. So I need to add a bead as I go. So it gives me the most flexibility I can get. I can choose the shape, the color, the size of the bead, depending on what part of the garment I'm working on at the time, whether that be the collar, the cuff, or the hemline, or just even the yoke, and how I shape it and what design I want to put on it. I can design that as I go, and it's not, I guess you can call it an afterthought, but it's something I can implement. And as I said, it gives me the most flexibility as a knitter and as a designer. That's really key for me. So I've prepared a couple of examples down below. So here I've prepared a sampling of different beads and buttons that we can add to any project. Here you can see beads of the same color, but different sizes, and they could be used on the same project, but at different places. So, I mean, you may want to put smaller beads at the hem and larger beads at the collar to mimic a necklace, perhaps. Not sure. It's all good. Oh, I also wanted to just give you a better look at the dental floss and how that looks. And here are some two different, I mean, you can contrast colors, but what I wanted to call your attention to is on these glass seed beads, and they are 11/1, whereas these are glass E beads, and they are 6/0. And what those numbers mean are in reference to the size. So you would get approximately 6, where's my ruler? 6 of these glass beads to an inch, and you would get approximately 11 of the other glass beads to an inch over here. So that gives you an idea of what those numbers mean. It's how many beads per inch. These beads I bought at a different place, and they didn't have a number on the package, so I was kind of curious. I wrapped them up in tape anyway and thought, oh, let's take a look. So that's about 4 beads to an inch, to give you an idea. This is another type of bead. These are so much fun. They come in so many colors, and you can buy them by the bucket or in bags of like 500 at Walmart. I have several bags of either glitter or glow-in-the-dark. Love those ones. Just so much fun with beads. And here are some buttons and a little tip that you might want to do before you begin Part of your selection process of which yarn you're using is get a piece of the scrap yarn from your project and run it through a piece of the bead or the button and see if it will go through doubled, because that is part of the technique. You have to be able to get the bead on there doubled. So if the hole is big enough to have a piece of the yarn from your project go through doubled, you know that that button or bead will work on your project. Obviously, the larger the button, the more spacing you'll need in between, unless of course you're looking for an overlap. That would be a different process entirely. Creativity. It's fantastic. Anything goes. So that's an idea. That's just to give you an idea of the different types of buttons and beads that there are to choose from, and of course what the numbers on the packages mean. So now let's move on to actually applying a button or a bead to your project. You can see I've got beads down here and I've added buttons as well, and this should show you what I'm doing. So let's go through it one step at a time. Large loop, remove the old loop off there, and this could be any stitch, knit or purl. I'm going to take my dental floss, hook it through the large loop that I've just created. I'm going to now place the bead onto the dental floss. So basically thread the dental floss through that bead, both pieces, and then transfer the bead from the dental floss onto the loop. Make sure that the loop is on the peg. Remove the dental floss. Pull it through. And there it is. Okay, so I've added a few rows in between so that we can see the beads that we just added. And now I'm going to switch over to buttons and add a couple of buttons in between these spaces. And I'm going to use the same process. So even though I'm going to add another button on my piece using the same process. So I've threaded the yarn loop, the new loop, with the dental floss. And I'm using a different button this time. It only has on the back side that piece. So I'm going to thread the button. There we go. Okay, so I've got both pieces of the dental floss through the button. I'm going to transfer the button from the dental floss to the yarn. And now I want to make sure, let me get rid of the dental floss. I want to make sure that the front of that button is going to be in the front, because as we know, that's the wrong side. This is the right side. So I'm going to I'm going to tug on my whole entire piece to make sure that that button goes down on the right side of the fabric. And it wobbled away on me. Okay, I'm going to try it again. As you can tell, buttons can be a little trickier. They're not as smooth and cooperative. Okay, so now let's get that down. Okay, here we are. So now there's my working yarn. And the button is there on the right side of the fabric. As a two-hole button, you've got the yarn on coming through on across the button. But this button, because it had the back side, you can only see the button itself and not anything else. So this may be the button you'd lean towards if you're going to be adding buttons to any garment as a decorative piece. That's just my opinion. So as you can see, the buttons or the beads are added in the same way. The buttons
have a different presentation on the fabric than the beads do, and this type of button that had the hole in the back obviously does not show any yarn on the front. And depending on the type of button, you could be looking at bears and lions and whatever, and that could be, you know, antlers or anything. You could really go for it that way as well. So it's all really into the let your creative juices flow. There are a couple more things that I wanted to mention, a couple of tricks and tips. So let me switch the camera angle and I'll share with you a couple of bonus pieces.
There was one more thing that I wanted to mention before I moved on, was thread, sparkly thread. This can be purchased at any fabric store in a variety of colors, and I added it off camera because I thought of it after the fact, but I just wanted to show you. I knit about 2 or 3 rows and added that, and all I did was I secured it around one peg at the end and carried it through as I was knitting, and I did a few rows back and forth a couple times, nothing major, you saw what I did, and then cut it, and boom, that was it. That was all it was required, and that adds a little bit of interest, a little bit of sparkle to any piece, anywhere. Doesn't have to be a full row, could be just a small section, again, on cuffs and collars, as you think of it. Just saying, it's something that can be added that I forgot to mention, and so that's a little bonus for you. Also provides many uses for a project, and it can be added anywhere because it could mimic a necklace at the neckline. You could have icicles going from the waistline or your cuffs just by putting beads in the ribbing. Another tip or trick that I use is if I've created a lightweight shawl like this one, you can see it's very thin and it has its own sparkle in the fabric, but I found that the edges were a little too flyaway for me and I needed some more substance to it. So I actually added a couple of beads in with the tassels. And I mean, I didn't add many, and you can't even see them. You can feel them, and of course I know they're there. But those few beads just give it that little bit of weight, and it makes the shawl stay a little bit more secure around my shoulders. Just that little bit of weight. Speaking of weight, when you're adding glass beads, not plastic beads, but glass beads will add weight to the garment. If you're adding glass beads across the bodice, you want to be careful not to add too many because you don't want to have your garment drooping in any way. Unless, of course, it's rouging. If you're doing some rouge, where it's a sweep, that might actually help with the sweep because it would weigh down the edges a little bit more. So there's a tip as well. I did mention that there were places that you should avoid putting a bead. So there are 2 places off the top of my head that I can think of right away. The first place being on the sleeve, especially near the elbow. If you're going to put it near the crease of the elbow, eventually you are going to fold your arm up and you might get a whole bunch of crunch of beads in your crease. And additionally, if you put your elbow down, you're going to get beads on your elbow, and that could be uncomfortable. Another place to avoid, for the same reason, is on a skirt, the back side of a skirt. You're going to sit down at some point, folks. What can I tell you? And you're going to have beads in your butt. Darn uncomfortable. And yes, that's the voice of experience talking right there. So avoid putting them on the back of the skirt. You can put them on the hemline of the skirt if the skirt is longer. So if the skirt goes below the knee, so that when you sit down you're not actually sitting on the hem, that would be fine. That would be non-painful. Anyway, enough said. 2 places not to put a bead. So just briefly to recap, today we looked at adding beads and buttons and even some sparkly thread as a little bit of a bonus. A surprise to everyone, including me. So we learned the tools we needed to make that possible. We also learned where to put beads, where not to put beads, and we had a little bit of fun along the way. So if you enjoyed this video and you found it helpful in any way, please like and subscribe. That would be great. So I'm Stacey, wishing you the focus to deliberately learn something new and the confidence to implement what you've learned. So until next time, and by the way, next time, we're going to be increasing in the round. You may want to put your notifications on for that one. Just saying.